Kevin Hart has never once walked into a room he couldn't win over. Not the comedy clubs that booed him off before he'd finished his first minute. Not the studio executives who told him he'd never carry a movie. He had no idea Whoopi Goldberg had spent weeks building a room specifically designed so that skill wouldn't work. She didn't tip her hand early. That's what made it dangerous. 20 minutes of easy laughs, warm applause, the kind of segment that makes a guest relax exactly enough to stop watching for the punch. Then she reached for a folder thick enough that even the camera operators noticed the weight of it hitting the desk. 3 headlines, 3 different fires, all stacked on top of each other, timed to land in the same 11 minutes with nowhere for him to catch his breath between them. Kevin's grin held for exactly 1 second too long. The split second everyone in that studio would later swear they saw him recalibrate in real time, like a fighter realizing the bell hadn't actually rung yet. What happened next wasn't the meltdown Whoopi was clearly hoping to catch on camera. It was something far more dangerous for her. A man who has spent his entire career turning rooms that hate him into rooms that love him. Doing exactly that, live, in front of millions of people, while the woman who built the trap sat there watching her own strategy get used against her. Subscribe right now. Because you're about to watch whether a folder full of headlines can actually beat a man who's been winning over hostile rooms since before anybody in that building knew his name. The View studio buzzed with high energy that morning, the specific electricity reserved for a guest who never sits still and never lets a room stay quiet for long. Kevin Hart, 46, deep into promoting his 2026 to 2027 tour and juggling 3 separate film releases, walked onto the set already mid-joke, working the audience before he'd even reached the chair. "Kevin Hart, everybody," Whoopi announced, and the ovation was loud and immediate, the crowd already laughing before he'd said a word. "Whoopi Goldberg," Kevin said, settling into the chair with theatrical exaggeration. "You know I love you, but every time I come on this show, something happens. I'm walking in today feeling like I need a bulletproof vest." The audience roared. The first several minutes moved at Kevin's usual breakneck pace. 72 hours dropping on Netflix, the Jumanji sequel wrapping post-production, the untitled Henry Cavill spy comedy still in early stages, his new Netflix comedy competition series discovering the next generation of stand-ups. He talked about co-hosting the World Cup draw at the Kennedy Center, still slightly stunned by his own trajectory. "I got kids doing Netflix specials before they've paid a single light bill in comedy clubs," he said. "I want them to know what it's like to bomb first. Bombing built my whole career. You don't learn timing from a good crowd. You learn it from a room that hates you, and you gotta win them back one joke at a time." The audience laughed warmly. This was the Kevin Hart everyone had come to see. Relentless, self-aware, always 3 jokes ahead of the conversation. Whoopi hadn't said much yet. She sat with a thick folder closed in front of her, tapping it occasionally, waiting. It was Sarah who opened the door, entirely without meaning to. "Kevin, you've built Heartbeat into this massive media company, from bombing at open mics to running an empire. What's that journey actually felt like?" Kevin's energy softened slightly, something more genuine coming through. "It's felt like proving my mother right, one day at a time. She used to tell me God doesn't make mistakes putting people where they are. I didn't believe her for a long time. Now I've got a company with my name on it, and I still wake up some mornings surprised nobody's kicked me out yet." The audience applauded warmly. That's when Whoopi opened her folder. "Speaking of that empire," she said, her tone shifting just enough that the temperature dropped several degrees, "let's talk about what's actually happening inside it." The studio went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. Kevin's easy grin didn't fully disappear, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "All right," he said, sitting back slightly. "Let's hear it." "Let's start with the roast itself," Whoopi said, flipping open the folder to a page marked with a sticky note. "Years of very public tension with Cat Williams, him calling you an industry plant on multiple platforms, questioning your entire authenticity as a comedian. Then suddenly you two hug it out on stage in front of cameras. Was that real reconciliation, or was that just good television timed perfectly for a streaming special?" The audience leaned forward, sensing this was the real opening shot. It was real, Kevin said, his voice steady but with something guarded underneath it now. You think I orchestrated years of a man calling me fake on podcasts just to set up one hug? Kat said things about me that hurt, publicly, repeatedly. I let it hurt because getting defensive back would have just fed the story further. When he was ready to talk man to man, I was there. That's not content, Whoopi. That's two grown men finally being tired of a beef neither one of us fully remember starting. Some would say the timing was awfully convenient for a special that needed a viral moment, Whoopi pressed. Some people need everything to have an angle, Kevin replied. Sometimes two people just get older and get tired of being mad. Multiple rounds of layoffs at Heartbeat, stalled productions, executive departures, reports that the company's valuation has dropped hundreds of millions since its peak, Whoopi said, reading directly from her folder. Meanwhile, you're touring, you're doing 3 movies, you're everywhere except apparently inside your own company fixing what's falling apart. Doesn't that bother you? A ripple moved through the audience. Sarah's hand drifted toward her coffee cup, though she didn't drink from it. It bothers me plenty, Kevin said, his voice steady but with an edge forming underneath it. You think I don't read those same headlines? I built that company from nothing specifically so I wouldn't have to depend on anybody else deciding my worth. Growth isn't a straight line, Whoopi. I've had to make hard calls, cut things that weren't working, restructure. That's not collapse. That's business. People lost their jobs, Kevin, Whoopi said, her voice gaining weight. Real people with families who believed in what you were building. Doesn't that deserve more than a business school explanation? The question landed harder than the ones before it. Kevin was quiet for a moment, something more somber crossing his face. It deserves everything I've actually given it, he said, his voice lower now. I called people myself. Not all of them, I couldn't, but more than you'd think. I helped place folks at other companies through my own contacts. You want to make this about me being callous, but you don't know what happened in rooms you weren't in, Whoopi. You know what a headline told you. Some would call it more than restructuring, Whoopi pressed, flipping a page. There's also the deal with Authentic Brands Group back in January. A lot of insiders read that as you stepping back from daily operations entirely. Sounds less like a CEO fixing his company and more like a guy cashing out before it gets worse. The audience gasped audibly. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Kevin's jaw tightened, though his voice remained level. I brought in a partner with more retail and licensing experience than I have, so the parts of my business I'm not an expert in get run by people who are. That's not cashing out. That's the same thing every smart business owner does eventually, knowing what you're good at and hiring for what you're not. That's a generous read of a company hemorrhaging money and staff, Whoopi said. And that's a headline read of a business that's still standing after 5 years, in an industry where most production companies with my name recognition never got built in the first place. Kevin shot back. The room had gone completely still. Even the camera operators seemed to lean in. Whoopi wasn't finished. She turned another page. Let's talk about the roast then. Your Netflix special. A joke about George Floyd that a lot of people, including pastors, community leaders, called deeply disrespectful. You were the host. You let it happen. Some would say your silence in that moment said more about your values than anything you've built. The studio went dead silent. Even Sarah looked down at the desk. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, his expression harder now than it had been all morning. I didn't write Tony's material, he said finally, his voice low and controlled. I don't control every word that comes out of every comedian's mouth on a stage I'm hosting. That's not how a roast works, and you know that. But you didn't say anything afterward either, Whoopi pressed. Not on stage, not publicly until the backlash forced a response. I addressed it the way I address everything, by making sure the people it actually hurt heard from me directly, not through a press statement written for headlines, Kevin said, his voice gaining intensity. You want to know something? I spent that same night calling out Hulk Hogan's actual documented racist comments on that same stage, to his face, in front of everybody. Nobody wrote a single article about that part. Maybe because it's easier to praise you for punching up than to hold you accountable for what you let slide, Whoopi said. Or maybe, Kevin said, leaning forward, because outrage about one joke gets more clicks than context about the whole show. You picked the one moment that fit the story you wanted to tell about me today, Whoopi. That's not accountability. That's editing. I think the community that felt hurt would say it's more than editing, Whoopi replied, her voice firm. And I'd never tell them their hurt wasn't real, Kevin said, softening slightly. I called some of those voices myself privately the same week, not for cameras. Because I actually wanted to understand it, not perform understanding it. That's a conversation you weren't in the room for either, Whoopi. Whoopi tried a different angle, sensing the room's energy shifting but unwilling to retreat. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia then. You headlined the Riyadh Comedy Festival last fall. Human Rights Watch specifically called that festival out for whitewashing the government's record, the same government implicated in Jamal Khashoggi's murder. You took that money anyway. The audience shifted uncomfortably. I did, Kevin said, not backing away from it. I stood on a stage in a part of the world that almost never gets to see an unfiltered Black American comedian, and I told the same jokes I tell everywhere else. You think that's endorsing a government? Musicians play there. Athletes compete there. Nobody drags them onto a couch and reads them a human rights report before their set. Nobody's asking musicians to sit here this morning, Whoopi said. I'm asking you. Then ask me the real question instead of building a case, Kevin said, his voice hardening. Do I think what happened to Khashoggi was horrific? Yes, unequivocally. Did performing stand-up make me complicit in that? No. And you know the difference, Whoopi. You're just hoping I don't say it clearly enough on camera. A lot of comedians turned that booking down, Whoopi pressed. Doesn't that tell you something? It tells me they made a different choice than I did, based on their own conscience, Kevin said. It doesn't tell me my choice was wrong. I've spent my whole life being told what a kid from North Philly shouldn't be allowed to do. Shouldn't be allowed to headline arenas. Shouldn't be allowed to run a company. Shouldn't be allowed to decide for himself where he performs. I stopped letting other people's discomfort make my decisions a long time ago. I think it's fair to question the choices of someone with your platform, Whoopi said, her voice rising slightly. It's fair to question anything, Kevin said. What's not fair is stacking 3 different headlines from 3 different contexts into one folder and hoping I crack under the weight of all of them at once, instead of asking me one honest question and actually listening to the answer. The audience had gone utterly silent. Sarah had stopped pretending to look at her notes. I've been doing interviews since I was booed off stages nobody remembers the names of, Kevin continued. I know exactly what an ambush dressed up as journalism sounds like. This morning's had that same rhythm since the first page of that folder came out. He shifted in his chair, his energy still high but sharper now, more focused. You want to know what really gets me, Whoopi? I've never once ducked a hard question in my whole career. Ask me about my divorce. Ask me about the extortion attempt years back. Ask me about every mistake I've ever made publicly, and I'll sit here and own every single one of them because I have. What I won't do is sit here and let you build a version of me out of 3 unrelated headlines stitched together to look like a pattern that isn't actually there. Whoopi tried one more angle. There are people watching this morning, Kevin, parents specifically, who look at you as this example of somebody who turned his life around, built something for his kids. Doesn't a segment like this worry you, that they might see cracks in that image? My kids don't learn who I am from a segment, Whoopi, Kevin said, his voice dropping, more serious now than it had been all morning. They learn it from watching me get back up every single time something like this happens. You think I'm worried about my image cracking? I've been rebuilding this image my whole life, one hard morning at a time. This is just Tuesday. Whoopi's composure cracked slightly. That's not fair, isn't it? Kevin tilted his head, studying her with genuine curiosity now instead of defensiveness. You've been sitting at that table for 15 years asking guests to account for every headline written about them, good and bad, fair and unfair. When's the last time somebody asked you the same thing? When's the last time somebody built a folder about every choice you've made in 4 decades of television and expected you to defend all of it in 11 minutes? Whoopi opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. That's what I thought, Kevin said, not unkindly but with unmistakable finality. He stood up slowly, the movement pulling the energy of the room with him. "I came here today to talk about a tour I'm proud of, and a comedy competition giving new comics the same shot somebody once gave me. I answered every single question you asked, even the hard ones, even the ones clearly built to make me look bad on camera. I didn't dodge one of them." He looked around the studio, at the frozen audience, at Sarah's stricken expression, at Whoopi, who hadn't managed a full sentence in over a minute. "For the record, I've got no hard feelings. I think you believe you're holding me accountable. But there's a difference between accountability and ambush, Whoopi, and I've been in enough rooms in my life to know exactly which one just happened here. Kevin, I think we're just having a candid conversation." Whoopi started, but he was already reaching for his jacket. "No," he said, calm and immovable. "A candid conversation doesn't come with a folder 3 headlines deep, built before I ever sat in this chair. I've been booed off worse stages than this one, Whoopi. This didn't even come close." He adjusted his jacket with quick, practiced movements, the same energy he'd walked in with now, carrying something sharper underneath it. Then, to Whoopi, one final time, his voice dropping just enough that the whole studio leaned in to hear it. "You know what's funny? My mama used to tell me God doesn't make mistakes putting people where they are. I think that's true for me. I think it's true for you too, sitting up there at that table for 15 years. Maybe spend a little less time deciding who deserves a folder, and a little more time remembering what it felt like before anybody thought you were worth writing one about." He paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one last time. "For what it's worth, I hope Heartbeat gets everything figured out too. I hope the next headline about it is a good one. But I'm not going to sit here and let today's segment be the only version of that story anybody remembers." And with that, Kevin Hart, 5'4", $5 billion, and still, underneath all of it, the kid who got booed off every stage in North Philadelphia before anybody believed in him, nodded once to the stunned audience and walked off the set without looking back. The silence that followed was absolute. Whoopi Goldberg sat frozen at the head of her own table, the folder still open in front of her, headlines nobody wanted to look at anymore. Nearly a full minute passed before anyone at that table moved. Sarah stared at the door he'd walked through, her hand still pressed to her chest. Sonny hadn't blinked in what felt like 30 seconds. Somewhere in the audience, someone had started laughing quietly, not out of amusement, but the particular disbelieving laugh people make when they've just watched something they know they'll be talking about for weeks. A stagehand near the exit later said the last thing anyone saw of Kevin that morning was him pausing in the hallway, pulling out his phone to text someone and saying to no one in particular with a small, tired smile that some rooms just remind you why you never stopped fighting for the next one. The cameras kept rolling on an empty chair, an open folder, and a host who had just discovered in front of millions of people exactly what it costs to build a case against a man who has spent his entire life turning other people's low expectations into the punchline of his own success.